In the oppressive heat of an August night in 2008, on the shadowy outskirts of St. Louis, 17-year-old Jake came face to face with a nightmare that would haunt him for decades. Now, after years of silence, he's finally ready to share the terrifying encounter that changed his life forever. But to understand the horror of that night, you first need to know how a troubled teen found himself in the crosshairs of something inhuman. Expelled from school and teetering on the edge of self-destruction, Jake's life took an unexpected turn when he met Boris, a hard-nosed Bosnian refugee with a mysterious past. Where others saw a lost cause, Boris recognized a fighter. Taking Jake under his wing alongside Nick, the son of a famous kickboxer, Boris subjected them to a brutal training regimen that would push them to their absolute limits. For Jake, this merciless discipline became an unlikely lifeline, while Nick saw it as a chance to escape his father's towering legacy. Little did they know, Boris wasn't just teaching them to fight. He was preparing them for a confrontation with the impossible. Boris's training instilled in Jake and Nick a keen sense of situational awareness, a skill that would prove crucial in their future encounter. Jake recalled how Boris would often quiz them about their surroundings, demanding they notice every detail of the landscape they traversed.
What did you see? How many people? What were they wearing?
Boris would bark at these questions, training them to absorb information unconsciously. This heightened awareness became second nature to the young fighters, allowing them to react swiftly in the face of danger. For months, the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois became their proving ground. Every morning at 5 a.m., just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, Jake and Nick would begin their grueling ascent. "Imagine the steps from Rocky," Jake explained, "but multiply that by about 100. The sheer size and steepness of Cahokia Mounds cannot be overstated." Their routine was intense, especially on weekends, each carrying a colored ball, blue for Jake, red for Nick. They would sprint up the mound, place their ball at the top, and race back down. The following day, they would retrieve the balls left behind, proving they had indeed completed the full course to the summit. For the first 2 months, the exertion often left them vomiting halfway up. But by August, after 4 months of relentless training, their bodies had been honed into peak physical condition. Jake remembered the transformation of his body, how his muscles had hardened, how his endurance had grown. The challenge that had once seemed impossible now felt like a warm-up. The east side of St. Louis, particularly the area around Cahokia, Illinois, was their arena, a place where danger lurked in every shadow. Boris, ever vigilant, had armed his young charges with .357 revolvers. In the urban jungle of St. Louis, this wasn't just a precaution, it was survival. The .357 revolvers Boris provided weren't just for show. He had drilled the boys relentlessly in their use, teaching them to draw and fire with lightning speed. Jake remembered the weight of the weapon, how it had felt almost too heavy at first, but had become an extension of his arm over time. The responsibility of carrying such a powerful firearm had matured him quickly, adding another layer to his already complex adolescence. The Mississippi riverbank, with its twisting trails and dense foliage, offered the perfect training ground for aspiring fighters. But it also harbored dark secrets. Over the months, they'd encountered everything from wild dog packs to dead bodies along the riverbank. They'd stumbled upon homeless encampments, drug deals, and even witnessed Johns receiving services from sex workers. Boris had set up impromptu training equipment along their route, obstacles that had to be crushed or knocked down. Some were as high as 8 feet, designed for practicing specific jump kicks. These included plastic bags filled with sand suspended at various heights. Others were thin pieces of driftwood stuck deep in the sand that they either had to kick and shatter or manage to kick out of the ground entirely. Despite the inherent dangers, or perhaps because of them, this environment had forged Jake and Nick into formidable athletes. On that fateful Saturday in August, Jake and Nick had just completed their punishing run up Cahokia Mounds. Despite their exceptional fitness, exhaustion still clung to them as they climbed into Boris's old white van. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorching day. They drove to the riverbank, a place Jake described as a really bad area. Boris scanned the surroundings before setting his timer. The young fighters had 4 minutes to reach a designated spot and return. Jake and Nick set off at a steady jog, with Nick in the lead. As they rounded a bend in the trail, putting them out of sight of the van, the horror began to unfold. The first warning was the smell, an overwhelming stench of death that hit Jake like a physical force, causing him to retch. Then came the sounds of a struggle ahead, Nick's voice rang out with their code.
RNG, run and gun.
As Jake rounded the corner, he saw a scene that defied reality. Nick was leaping over a piece of driftwood, his agility a testament to their training. But behind him was something that shouldn't exist. A creature that looked like a man but wasn't. It was massive, standing over 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur with a reddish tint. In a split second, Jake raised his .357 and fired. The bullet tore through the foliage, and the creature's reaction was terrifying. It let out a roar that Jake described as a 100-year-old smoker mixed with a really big dog all howling together. The sound echoed through the trees, seeming to shake the very ground beneath their feet. The beast turned, and Jake saw its face clearly for the first time. It had a long snout filled with teeth, gleaming like daggers. Its eyes burned with an unnatural intelligence, a yellow-orangish color that seemed to pierce right through him. Jake later described the creature's head as being the size of a basketball, similar to an English Mastiff's, but with a shape more akin to a German Shepherd's. In recounting the creature's appearance, Jake emphasized the intelligence he saw in its eyes. It wasn't just animal cunning, but something more, a cold, calculating intelligence that seemed to assess them as they fled. This detail haunted Jake long after the encounter, making him question the nature of the beast and its origins. The creature's body was muscular, built like a champion boxer, but grotesquely exaggerated. Its chest and shoulders were massive, tapering to a slim waist. The legs, while bent like a dog's when on all fours, seemed to straighten somewhat as it stood upright. Its hands were massive and fur-covered, with claws that looked capable of shredding steel. Jake was particularly struck by these hands, describing them as similar to the character Sabretooth from X-Men. The sight of those hands reaching for them would feature prominently in Jake's nightmares for years to come. As the creature began to move towards them, Jake fired again, this time hitting its hand. Nick, ahead of Jake, had already emptied his revolver, firing 6 shots before turning to run. The two young men sprinted for their lives, their hearts pounding in their ears. Their months of training kicked in, their bodies moving almost on autopilot as they navigated the treacherous terrain. They burst from the tree line to find Boris already in action, half hanging out of the van's window, his shotgun blazing. The old warrior's face was set in grim determination as he covered their retreat, the rapid fire of his weapon reverberating across the riverbank. Boris was also wielding a Draco, a compact AK-47 variant, showcasing his readiness for any threat. Jake would later reflect on Boris's calm in the face of such otherworldly danger, wondering what horrors the man had seen in his past to prepare him for this moment. As they sped away, bouncing wildly over railroad tracks, Jake caught glimpses of not one, but 2 creatures. One was lying motionless, apparently hit by Boris's shotgun blasts. The other stood on its hind legs, its muscular form a terrifying silhouette against the morning sky. The image of that silhouette, backlit by the rising sun, would be forever etched in Jake's memory. In the chaos of their escape, Jake was flung around in the van, repeatedly hitting his head. Through his dazed state, he saw the creature stand upright, its form unmistakably that of a bipedal canine, a werewolf, for lack of a better term. Jake noted that it was clearly male, with visible genitalia, a detail that added a disturbing layer of realism to the encounter, challenging any notion that this might have been a man in a costume. Due to YouTube's restrictions, a detail we can't show you. In the aftermath, Boris swore them to secrecy.
Tell nobody what we just saw. Nobody. Nobody. Nobody.
The encounter had lasted mere moments, but its impact would resonate for years. The gravity in Boris's voice, the fear hidden beneath his gruff exterior, impressed upon Jake and Nick the importance of their silence. Later, in the privacy of Nick's car, they tried to process what they'd seen. Nick revealed that he had witnessed even more: torn tents, the remains of what looked like 2 men and a woman, ripped to shreds. The horror of it all was almost too much to bear. Jake remembered the haunted look in Nick's eyes as he described the scene, a look that would resurface whenever they spoke of that day in the years to come. For years, Jake and Nick kept their silence, only discussing the incident when alcohol loosened their tongues. Boris, who passed away a year later, occasionally alluded to similar creatures he'd encountered during the war in Bosnia, though his broken English made the details hard to understand. Jake now regrets not pressing Boris for more information, wondering what other secrets the old warrior had taken to his grave. The experience changed them profoundly. They never returned to that stretch of riverbank, instead moving their training to the relative safety of downtown St. Louis. It took Jake nearly a decade before he could bring himself to visit Cahokia Mounds again. The aftermath of the incident left a lasting impact on the local community, though few knew the true cause. Jake mentioned hearing rumors in the following weeks about missing persons and unexplained animal attacks. The authorities attributed these incidents to the usual dangers of the area: violent crime, wild animals. But Jake and Nick knew the terrifying truth that lurked behind these official explanations. Jake's story is a testament to the hidden dangers that lurk in the shadows of our world. Now, years later, he's considering a return to the unknown. This time, armed with the skills of his past, a high-end camera, an AK-47, and his loyal English Mastiff by his side. Driven by a relentless curiosity and a deep-seated need for answers, Jake is prepared to confront the darkness once more, determined to capture evidence of the creatures that defy explanation. His unique background as a seasoned fighter and survivor of a near-fatal encounter has equipped him with a rare blend of courage and expertise, making him one of the few willing and able to seek out these living nightmares. If you've had an encounter with the unexplained, we urge you to contact us at deadnetstudios@gmail.com. Your story could be the missing piece that helps unravel the mysteries of these cryptid predators. Remember, in a world where dogmen roam, knowledge is more than just power, it's survival. Jake's harrowing experience is a stark reminder that the line between the familiar and the terrifying is far thinner than most dare to imagine.
In the shadows of the digital night, we wandered far and seen sunsets, from haunting tales to eerie lights. Dead Net Studios, where